Alright folks, welcome back to the channel. Now I've been playing God of War Ragnarok probably maybe for about 20 hours now, so I did want to give some feedback on the channel of my overall thoughts of the game thus far. And let's just say there's some pros and some cons in regards to this game. I was a fan of the original game. I played through the original game, beat it. I think I played maybe halfway through the new game plus, and then I just kind of got bored and I wanted to play something else. So that was my experience of it way back, I think back in 2018 if I remember. So it was at that point when it was the last time I really played this type of game. And coming back into the sequel, what was my first impressions? Well, maybe the first 5-10 hours, a little bit slow paced. And what I would say is familiar. So I think the focal point of the sequel really is the story, and more close to the story around Atreus. He's a lot older than he is in God of War 2018. And I suppose it focuses around his development, his growth, and I suppose the impact it's going to make on certain characters in the game, including Kratos himself. What I would say about him as a character overall is he's become a little bit unlikable. And it's more so he does a lot of complaining and a lot of whinging. And I mean, I think that again is got to do with the story arc in particular. Obviously, as he's getting older, you know, he's developing, his voice is now deeper. He's no longer a child and he's slowly becoming a man. But that doesn't stop it being irritating, especially in a game itself. And he has so much dialogue. Like sometimes I just felt like just saying, just stop talking for a minute. Let me try and explore and discover. I don't need to be hearing his voice every fucking 2 minutes. And that's not to say and have a shot at the story in general. I do like the story. I do like how it's delivered. But sometimes it's just overly done and it drags it out. And the dialogue is dragged out too. In particular, as I mentioned with Atreus. So, I mean, to be honest with you, why do I want to play a God of War game? I ultimately want to play a God of War game because I want to be Kratos and I want to just kick some ass. That's the reality for me when I think about God of War, and that's not going to change here. So, you know, the gameplay for me was core to the original games, and it's also why I absolutely loved the reboot back in 2018. The core combat, the general gameplay was just so good, and the combat was so fluid and it was so easy to control. Now, looking at the combat system and the gameplay system overall in God of War Ragnarok, let's just say familiar. Plays it safe. There's some subtle differences in the combat. I particularly like the fact is at the very, very start of the game, you're just not stuck with your single axe. You actually get to use the Blades of Chaos as well from the get-go. So that adds variety in the combat straight off the bat. There's loads of new moves. And there's some very, very familiar moves and some very, very familiar animations, nearly down to the point of whereas some of the animations look like they were directly ripped from the 2018 game. So just be prepared for that. And I'll tell you what, if you didn't enjoy the 2018 game, I wouldn't advise you come in to God of War Ragnarok expecting anything radically different. Anyway, I don't want to make this too negative, but I do want to say that when the game gets into a certain flow, what I mean is when you get to explore, when you get to travel areas and discover areas yourself, and the combat is still as tight as ever, it's very, very enjoyable. And it's challenging too, it's a challenging game. That's where this game is at its strongest and its most enjoyable. Where I feel the game is at its weakest is at its linear points. And what I would say is the linear points in God of War Ragnarok are much, much longer and dragged out than I remember the 2018 game being. What I would say is some of the fat here could have been trimmed, and I think it's just systemic of AAA design right now is every developer feels like they have to bloat their game or make it absolutely massive 50-hour long campaign. And look, as I mentioned, I'm 20 plus hours in and I already feel like there's some pacing issues in there. And again, especially the linear moments where it's just like there's some segments in there that's like, has no reason to be in here at all. This section here could have been half the length. You have to bear in mind the gameplay loop in this is very, very familiar. You know, you've come into a new area, you know, you get into a fight, you explore, you open up chests, you solve a few puzzles, you rinse and repeat. And, you know, when that happens over and over and over again in one big lengthy hour-long segment, it can get a little bit exhausting. And again, I just prefer the exploration aspect of the game when it opens up in these kind of mini open world hubs. Even maybe the word open world isn't really correct in this case, but again, they're like large sprawling maps. It could be a river or it could be a lake. you could be traveling on a husky sled or a boat or something like that. That's where you kind of create your own stories as well. So I found those just much more enjoyable, and some of the side missions in particular are quite enjoyable, and they have their own nice backstories as well. And as I mentioned, without spoiling anything too much, there are other central focal characters here in this game, not only Kratos and Atreus. So, and that to me is one of the best aspects of the sequel. So look, I just did want to air my thoughts out on the game so far. I want to get some conversation going about this. Honestly, I'm sick of the media, the general games media, you know, beefing up so many games, saying they're the greatest things to sliced bread, and nothing beats this game this year. I think that's an unfair statement right now with God of War Ragnarok. It has its problems, and I just feel like a lot of these games medias, they don't want to call these things out. So that's what I'm going to try and do on the channel. But anyway, not to beat up on the game anymore. It is still a good game, and I still am enjoying myself. Ultimately, that's the main thing. Please share your comments down below, guys, and if you disagree with me, so what? That's what it's all about. We want to hear different opinions here, and we want to talk about them. Let's get going. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.